Hi, everyone. For Filthy Lot Entertainment, welcome to Drawn and Cornered. It's the show that corners today's best comic book artists as they answer deep dive questions while they draw art suggested by fans. After the show, you can bid on the art, and all the proceeds will go to our guest charity of choice. So make sure you watch through to the end to see the final product. Today in the drawing chair is John McCrea, a comic book legend with a varied and impressive career spanning over 3 decades. You know him for his unique style and signature dark humor on books like Judge Dredd, The Boys, Yondu, Dead Eyes, and of course, Hitman. With a resume like that, what more needs to be said? Today, we're lucky enough to have him cornered with us. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Before we start our Q&A, I'd love to ask you, can you please tell our viewers what it is that you're going to draw for us today and which charity this will benefit?
Yes, I'm going to draw Judge Dredd. Why the hell not? And even though he's got all the eagles and fussy bits, I'm going to give it a shot. Might as well be a glutton for punishment here. And I'll give any money that anybody feels kind enough to donate to the Hero Initiative, I think. One of my favorite charities, So yeah, that's the way it's going to roll, if that's fine.
Excellent. So at the end of the show, we are going to reveal that artwork, and you'll be able to see the auction link down below in the description to find that auction, and hopefully we'll raise quite a bit of money.
Fingers crossed. If I
Fingers
don't blow
crossed.
It, let's see how we roll.
Now, John, 3 decades is a long stint in any line of work. Impressive to say the least. Let's start at the beginning. What was your childhood like in terms of art? Were you drawing a lot, reading comics, or did that come later?
Oh, no. Yes, I was drawing from when I could. I mean, my mom and dad said that I always drew from when I could pick up a pencil. I was scribbling away. And then when I was 4, they decided they were in the local newsagent, and they picked up a copy of Avengers #8, which they brought home to me because they thought, well, John likes drawing. Maybe this will inspire him to do some stuff, because I had all the lovely pictures and everything. And they really lived to regret that, because that was it. I looked at it and that it was, Road to Damascus moment, the light shining down on me as I turned from it and went, I am going to do this for a living when I grow up. I'm going to draw comics. I mean, and I just fell in love with the medium at that very moment when I was 4. It was the British reprints of the American comics. Our comics came out probably a few years after yours. So Avengers, I was 4. I'm not going to reveal my age because it's too traumatic. But the second comic I got was Spider-Man and Steve Ditko issues. I think I started around issue 14 or something like that with Ditko, and Spider-Man just spoke to me, of course. Young. He wasn't my age, obviously, but he was young, and he was exciting and vibrant, and the way Ditko drew was just amazing to me. And Steve Ditko is still my favorite artist to this day. And so yeah, I was just sold at that moment, and I just drew and drew and drew and scribbled away from that moment on, to the point where my mum and dad were tearing their hair out and thinking I was going to be an out of work no-hoper, because I was growing up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and how does somebody from Northern Ireland end up drawing American comics? It's
right.
The 1970s, the Troubles are on, there's no internet, that's a big divide. So it seemed, I mean, my mum and dad didn't really understand comics either, and why would they? So it just seemed, so they were always fighting against it. I mean, they introduced it and then they had to fight against it. They wanted me to at least try to become a graphic designer or something like that, and just something that they could understand, that they knew. I mean, they obviously wanted us all to become doctors or lawyers, really, me and my brothers, but that didn't work out for them either. So,
Sure. What parent doesn't want that for their child?
Well, exactly. Yes. Become a lawyer and sell your soul, and just lose any grip in humanity that you might actually have. Yes. What parent doesn't want that for their child?
Now, being from Ireland, how did that impact the kind of work that you were exposed to? You mentioned that you had American comics that were reprints. I assume that there was also a lot of like 2000 AD floating around.
Well, not at that specific time, obviously. This was 72. No, earlier than that. This was 70, 71 that I was reading these comics. 2000 AD didn't come along until 77. And 2000 AD hit at quite the right age. It was perfect timing for me. I was 11. The Troubles were still rocking along. Punk music showed up. And it just, that cultural zeitgeist type of thing, it hit all the right markers. Before 2000 AD, I'd been reading all comics, anything I could lay my hands on. There were tons of humor comics in the UK, and I read all of those, as many as I could. It was my pocket money would afford.
Right.
But I would also read sort of action comics, and the British comics, things like Bullet and the war comics. There were a ton of war comics, and something called Action. And Action was the real key, because Action was published by Fleetway, and it was created by Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill. And Pat and Kevin wanted to do something that really changed comics completely. And so they had these stories like Dredger, which was about this tough cop brutal in the dream, and Kids Rule OK, which was about basically kids taking over and beating up adults and authority figures and being very violent. But my total favorite in the strip was a thing called Hookjaw, which was about a massive shark with a hook in its jaw. And of course, Jaws had appeared, and so they, appropriated that. But it took Jaws and just took it all the way up to 11. Whereas Jaws, you might see like a hand drifting down with blood coming out of it. In Hookjaw, one of my favorite things was, and I was 11, so forgive me, was this full page splash where Hookjaw leaps out of the water, and there's this boat with these two teenage kids in it, and he's biting them into bits, and their heads and limbs are spiraling off as they're still screaming in horror, and their bits are just flying around. Within a couple of months, it was banned. The comic was banned.
I can imagine.
And it was banned by conservative bullies in Whitehall, and then Pat Mills and Kevin Neal kind of came along and went, well, what can we do? We'll put it in the future. We'll take all this violence and we'll remove it from today, and we'll put it in the future, and that'll make it work, because then it won't be influencing our children so much. It won't relate to our kids as it speaks. And of course, Dredd, Flesh, all the rest. Came spinning out of 2000 AD, and that was me sold, on that front as well.
Find the loopholes to tell your story.
Absolutely. That Pat especially and Kev were very canny, and saw the way around that. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger is the exact one for that, isn't it? Because Action was great, but 2000 AD is amazing.
It seems like the violence in comics and stuff like that, the banning of it, or the sort of censorship of it, seems to have come quite late in the UK. Because I mean, in the United States, that was happening in the 50s and 60s when The Seduction of the Innocent was published and the Comics Code Authority was being developed.
Well, that's because you had EC comics and things like that. You had stuff, all those crime and horror comics. We didn't have any of that in the UK. We were 20 years behind you or whatever. We had humor comics, really, for the most part, TV fun and sort of humor comics and things like that, which you had, of course, as well. But we didn't have any of that. We didn't have the expanse of comics that you had. You have much bigger population, a much more diverse, broad church of comics. And so therefore you had things like the EC comics, which are amazing. And you were going through a lot of serious shit at the time. And so comics were getting blamed for some of that. We didn't get that until our comics sort of grew up, I suppose, and
Right.
and became a little bit more more easy to blame, I suppose. Shift the blame. That's what politicians do. So
Well, one of the things that I loved I discovered the British reprints in the 90s. I had relatives in the UK. We went to visit, and I didn't know that Marvel and DC reprinted them in the UK. I just assumed that everyone got the same copies. What I liked about them is that I remember them being a larger format.
Sure.
Which I really liked, because you could really take in the art a lot more. They kind of felt
Absolutely.
they were almost like the father of treasury editions that you see today.
Sure. Yes. No, I love that about them too. And they were generally in black and white to start with. So you got to see though the print quality was diabolical a lot of the time. But hey, but yes, you could get to see the art more clearly, better. They didn't have as many adverts as the American comics. So there were good things about them. They chopped the stories up a bit because anthology titles were much more popular in the UK. So they chopped all the stories up and ran about 3 per issue. So it was a different thing. And obviously in the UK, comics come out weekly, and in the States they come out monthly. So we started to catch up with you quite quickly, and then from that point, and they were doing very well in the UK, but because we were catching up, Stan and co all decided that perhaps they needed to create some British-led content, and then you got things like Captain Britain starting to happen, and various other things, and yeah, that all really helped sort of with the general movement of, because you got Alan Moore coming in through Captain Britain, so it gave more of a more scope for writers and artists to have outlets for their work.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now your first published credit, according to Wikipedia, is Fast Forward from 2000 AD in 1989. But were you doing comics before that too, or was that purely the first time?
Yeah. Well, I was drawing my own comics I was drawing a lot of sample work. I spent about 4 years from when I was 18 to 22 doing purely sample work and doing some other bits and pieces, and I sent artwork into various, like the Comics Journal. I sent a couple of illos into, or was it Amazing Heroes? I think it might have been Amazing Heroes. And that's much more likely. I sent illustrations into, which got published. I did a Spirit one and a Mage one, and they both got published in Amazing Heroes. So I was doing stuff and just trying to get my work seen. I mean, strictly speaking, that wasn't my first published work. I also did a thing called Centurions, which a British version of the Centurions, because I realized they were published in the States as well. And it was Will Simpson who gave because I had started hanging around with Will. He was the first really pro comic artist in Northern Ireland, or in Ireland at all. And Will was working for Centurions, and he showed my portfolio to those guys, the guys who were publishing that, and they gave me a small job to do for Centurions. It was one of those things where you grow up fast and learn a lot immediately about what the industry is like. Because I was going through my Barry Windsor Smith phase at the time I was doing Centurions, and I drew all these sort of elegant, slightly pre-Raphaelite faces on things, and then they came along and pasted over all the faces with the cookie cutter specific drawings that they wanted. Because it had to look like the characters, and anything that deviated was too much. And I guess my style deviated too much, and that was a shocker. Also, it had a deadline of about 4 days, and I had to do 8 pages or 6 pages or in 4 days, and so I had 2 nights of no sleep. Work, night, work. And so that introduced me to that concept as well of all nighters, which was quite the thing. And I have no idea how I anybody does all-nighters now. I mean, I haven't done one for years, and the very idea of it makes me feel physically ill.
Yeah.
It's just I can't do that anymore. Thank Christ I don't have to. So
Well,
yeah.
aside from the exhaustion of it all, how did it feel to actually get your first professional gig now that you were getting paid to do what you love?
Yeah, I mean, I earned about 600 quid that first year of my professional career, 600 quid. So, I was really, comics, here we go. I was going to make a lot of dough, I realized. It felt great, except, of course, that when I saw it, the coloring was terrible. They'd covered up my faces. So, yeah, it was kind of like a bit of give and take. 2080 was better, yeah, because that was black and white, so that was published and it looked like my artwork. I also did a couple of GI Joe stories for British comics. I did a Storm Shadow and a Snake Eyes, 2 little short stories, because this was for the British version, which was called Action Force. So I did a couple of those, and they were colored terribly. And the first one was inked by somebody else, and I hated the inking, so I inked the second one myself. It's like anything, isn't it? You've got this desire to break into this hallowed field, and then the realities of it just keep coming. So yeah, I was thrilled because, hey, it's better than working in a bank, I thought, or what have you. Maybe I'm not so sure these days, but the reality of it kept sort of not letting me down, but certainly giving me a sort of a gentle sort of kidney punch every so often.
Yeah. You mentioned 2000 AD. You did a lot of work on that early on. How did you get on board with them, and what was it like back in the early 90s?
Well, it was like, I guess it's like working for any comic company, really, in that you don't really interact with the people. Actually, that's a lie. It was great fun working for 2000 because I was getting to work with Garth. Obviously, this was Garth and I broke in together. Well, he broke in with me. I had already done these few stories beforehand. And
so we're talking about Garth Ennis, yeah?
Oh, yes, that's the fella. Yes. I'd forgotten his surname for a second, so do apologize. And so that was good fun. And I was working on some characters that, I worked on Troubled Souls first, which is all about the troubles in Northern Ireland. And then we moved over to 2000 itself and did some Dredd and things. And that was great fun. The other good aspect of it was that I would a lot of the time I'd be running up to the wire on deadline. 2000 at that time was doing mainly painted work, fully painted artwork, and that's not my strong point. But I had to struggle through doing that. So what generally tended to happen, I was always right up to the wire with my deadline. So back in the old days, I could drive up to I'd finish my work and I'd bundle it all up. And I would drive to the airport and I would just book myself a flight across to London. You could do it just at the airport, just pay 49 quid and you would standby ticket and you would just jump on the next plane. So I would just fly over to London with my artwork and go to the Fleetway offices and drop it off. And then usually what happened was there would be a liquid lunch that would end up being a liquid sort of day and a half or two for me, where I would just be, out on the tear with people. Because growing up in Northern Ireland, I didn't really know many people, in the comics field. I had some friends who were into comics and things like that. And I had started Belfast's first comic shop, admittedly. But, I was getting to hang around with my peers, other people who were in comics and I had heard of and knew. And so when I got over to London and I would meet up with all these people, I would kind of cut loose, and then we would just end up sort of going out and boozing, and it would just be a couple of days in London on the tear, hanging out with some amazing people. So that was always exciting and interesting. Nowadays, of course, I just email the shit in, so I never get to see anyone. So it's just it's different now, completely different. But yeah, those times were were amazing times, and and it was the whole scene was completely different, obviously.
Sure, yeah. I mean,
what
and
it is.
drawing Judge Dredd in your 20s must have been pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was all right. Yeah. I mean, I love Dredd, but I really struggled with drawing Dredd. So while it was awesome, all I could see was that I was shit compared to Mike McMahon. So,
Right.
I think I do a pretty decent Dredd these days, though. We'll see.
Yeah.
And so, but back then, as with everything, I mean, Dredd is such an iconic looking character, and just getting them right, I find very difficult. And when you are comparing yourself to guys like Mike McMahon and Brian Bolland, that's rough.
Your next big project was Hitman,
Sure.
which was also your entry into the North American publishing market that spun out of your work on The Demon. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Garth and I got given the date. Well, I guess I got a job with Garth. With Archie Goodwin gave me a job with James Hudnall doing a comic called Streets, which was again a fully painted thing, and that was me done with fully painted. At the end of that, I was just like, right, that's it. I'm hanging up my paints. I don't have to do this anymore. But that was my break into the American market. Was doing Streets, but Garth and I had been pitching for something, and they did want us. Obviously, this was what DC did back then: was they came over and they sort of hoovered up the talent. And I guess they'd run out of any good talent to hoover up, so they hoovered me up. And Garth and I jumped onto The Demon together after that, and that was a good fit for us. That was a really good fit. We had some good fun on that book. I mean, I read it recently when it got reprinted, and I was amazed how much I enjoyed it. Just running through it was just anarchic fun, and and it introduced Hitman, of course, into the DCU and to us, and I guess that was a big thing. Though interestingly, when I look back at the Hitman annual, I had to do that reasonably quickly, and it was 60 pages, I think, or something like that. And I hadn't realized how brutal 60 pages just like was going to be, because and
that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I was inking my own work, so they had to get somebody in to help ink it. And I noticed that obviously I didn't really think much of Hitman or think he was going to be anything particularly, because I gave all the pages with Hitman to the other inker, and I kept all the pages with The Demon for myself. So the Hitman's first appearance, a lot of the Hitman stuff is inked by somebody else, and that other person was kind of phoning it in themselves. So Hitman's first appearance wasn't as wonderful as I would hope it would be. That was one of those lessons you learn, is that you just don't know. Because obviously Bloodlines, there wasn't a great deal that span out of Bloodlines that was worth worth anything at all. Sorry to say. And I guess I wasn't thinking that Hitman was going to be up to much. When Garth told me that we were going to pitch Hitman to them, Gunfire had come out. He's another Bloodlines character, and I basically said to Garth, and I'd been reading Gunfire, and it was shit. And I said to Garth, no disrespect to Marv Wolfman and whoever drew it, Marv is a great writer, but he was phoning that stuff in. I mean, and I said to Garth, if we can't last longer than Gunfire, I'm going to quit. And luckily we did, because I mean, Jesus, it was just dreadful. So and that's why, and I also pushed Garth to put Gunfire into the later issue where we blew him up. So the 1 million version of Gunfire turned his ass into a hand grenade and blew him up. So that was good. So yeah, I didn't like Gunfire much.
That's all. Hitman did end up becoming quite a big book, even winning an Eisner in '98, and even made a splash in the industry with attention being garnered from hard to impress names like Harlan Ellison. How did that feel when all of that was happening at the time?
It was 60 issues, and that's a lot of work. And I really didn't have much time to look up. I've got to admit, it was nice that. I mean, I found that little piece that Harlan wrote recently,
Mhm.
sort of praising Hitman, and that was really really cool that he was reading it, and he was writing letters in, and Pete Tomasi, who was our editor, was corresponding with Harlan. So I guess Pete was really connecting more with Harlan than Garth and us and myself.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but yeah, it was cool, and I mean, it was great to for the book to be a success. Uh, and we had a lot of laughs on it, but we had a lot of battles as well. There was a lot of pushback from the rest because, of course, Hitman was occurring within the DCU,
Mhm.
and and we were taking the piss a fair bit, um, especially with the Bat Office. And the first issue, Tommy throws up on Batman, and
Right.
uh, yeah, no. So we were kind of setting out our stall there pretty clearly.
Mhm.
But of course, the Bat Office originally it was drawn where Tommy threw up on Batman's chest, and there were bits of carrot and stuff sticking out of the vomit and everything. And the Bat Office were just like, nope, you can't do this. You're disrespecting the Bat, and so we
Wow.
had to do it all off screen. So we got a lot of that, and the cat signal wasn't a favorite of theirs either. Uh, and I heard later that the Bat Office decided that they had wished they had never let us use any of their characters within
Oh, wow.
within Hitman, because we did just kind of take the piss out of it. But you know, that's it is what it is, and we got away with quite a bit. There were a few stories that got nixed. Like there was a Nightwing story that they just completely went, nope, you can't do that. And
Why?
because it was disrespectful, because we took
No,
the
what
piss.
well, what happens in the story
Well,
so
Tommy and Nat end
disrespectful?
up. It's the story appeared, but without Nightwing, and Tommy and
Right.
Nat end up drowning a guy that Nightwing is trying to chase down. They drown him in a toilet, and
Ah,
I guess while they're drowning him in a toilet, they're sort of distracting Nightwing and obviously humiliating him in whatever way. I'm a bit hazy on the specifics, but so yeah, that kind of got mixed. I think they just had enough with it by that point, and so they were just like, nope, nope, we want to draw, we want to use the Joker. Fuck off, So that was basically the process by that point. So as it goes along, you see less and less DCU characters appearing until there's none, and that was really what was behind the scenes of that. Also, Garth was not wanting to write superhero stuff more and more. It's
right.
Tommy starts out with the telepathy and the X-ray vision, and slowly he wants to get rid of that because, of course, it's not really what he wants. He just wants to do a guy with a gun shooting people and all his, and all the foibles of what he is all about. And so he
Mhm.
gave him the migraines to try and damp down that power, which was a clever way of doing it.
Well, when you created Tommy Moynihan, did you guys initially have the intention of continuing his story? Was it just one of those lightning in a bottle type things, or did it kind of end because there was, I guess you'd say there was definitely pushback from DC?
Oh yeah, there was pushback from DC, but not for the comic itself. Only from the offices, the Bat office, where DC were happy with Hitman. They were happy because it was successful, and
Mhm.
um, and they were very good to us. I mean, I'm being a bastard here saying what I'm saying, but they were good to us because when the sales had dropped to the point where they were going to cancel it, we had
Mhm.
we had a bunch of other stories that we wanted to tell, but DC said, listen, you can either try telling those stories and we may have to cancel it before you finish it, or just leave those stories out, run it until issue 60 and stop, and then you'll tell your story. So they gave us that option, and of course we went with option B. Thank you very much. So
Right.
we finished our story, and that was good. And so I've always thanked DC for that. They looked after us. It's just a Bat office. We're not particularly fond of us, and that's it. what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
Nobody gets along with everybody, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, Hitman definitely had a certain humoristic style to it, but it was also quite dark. Were you surprised at the book's reception?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was never a big seller. It never really rocked the foundations of. I mean, to a degree, it was always Preacher's little brother. I remember reading a review of it, which said like the sort of the sort of watered down version of Preacher, and that always sort of stung when I read those sorts of reviews, because actually I preferred Hitman to Preacher, not because of my art, but just because I preferred the characters. I liked the arcs. I liked the story better. I liked Tommy better than Jesse. Tommy was a much more relatable character. Jesse was this sort of perfect figure. He was Garth's sort of perfect version of himself.
Right.
You know, handsome, tall, muscular, beats everybody up, great with the ladies,
Right.
Completely unattainable. Whereas
Sure.
Tommy was a bit crap, couldn't shit in a fight. He was good with guns, but he was shit in a fight. He was an alcoholic. He was a gambler. He fucked up all the times. He was just, Tommy was useless, really, to a degree. But and that's much more relatable than that sort of perfect Jesse figure. And so I liked Hitman from that point of view, because it just did give you that more fallible figure. And God, did he do that? The cast, I felt I enjoyed more. They were all much more relatable. They from even down to somebody like Hacken, the sort of idiot who cuts his own hand off. Just enjoyable. Plus the mad zany sort of supporting cast. I mean, Preacher had Arseface, and we had Six Pack and Dog Welder and characters like that.
Yeah.
And it's I just prefer it. And it did sting sort of a little bit that Hitman was always second string, but hey, I got 68 good issues out of it, and that's great. Yeah, and we won our Eisner and all that.
Exactly. And you still get a lot of commission requests for Tommy Moynihan as well.
Oh yeah. Tommy's very popular still. I'm always drawing Tommy for somebody at some point or other. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Can you talk about the character's lasting appeal? I mean, how does that feel?
Well, yeah. I mean, I love that he's popular, and I love that he's and I think it's for the very reasons that I gave, that he is that way. I mean, the sort of humor counterpointed with that incredibly black sort of despair that ran through the strip as well. It became fairly clear fairly early that everybody was going to, spoilers, everybody was going to die. And so, but then you've got like dinosaurs showing up, and Six Pack and Beator behind the bar. And I've got to admit that, the editorial did fight with us over things like Beator behind the bar. Pete kept saying, you can't have this crazy demon from hell behind the bar. It just doesn't work. And Garth would be like, nah, he's staying. And and that was fair enough. And it did work. That was the thing about it. The mental juxtaposition of Beator and Hacken with his sawn off Mickey Mouse replacement hand, and Six Pack vomiting on the floor, alongside these sort of morality tales about these sort of killers, was quite interesting and did work. And I don't know if it was just a sort of a lightning in a bottle thing where it only worked at that time, and possibly it will never, we not get that right ever again. But hey, it ran, and we beat Gunfire by a number.
Yeah, for sure. That actually leads me to my next question. It seems like doing something like that at DC would never be possible now, but it also oddly seems more relevant than ever to look at the underside of superheroes. So with that in mind, would you ever consider bringing Tommy back, or what's the right situation like?
Well, DC own it, and but Garth does not want to bring him back. That's why Section 8 came back, because DC wanted to do more Hitman, and the only thing that Garth would do was Section 8. So that's why they came back. But Garth has told his story as far as that goes, and I can see that. So and fair play to him sticking to his guns on that.
Now, Hitman obviously isn't your only collaboration with Garth Ennis. You also worked on The Boys, The Demon, and Dix, among other things. Now, how did you guys meet initially? Was it the Irish connection?
Well, totally, yes. Like I said earlier, I was running a comic shop in Northern Ireland. Garth was in my brother's year at school, my younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me. So he would come in and buy his comics off me. And that's basically how it happened. He was coming in and buying Cerebus and Concrete, and everybody who came into the shop who knew that I was breaking into the industry and had ideas to be a writer would come in and say, "I've got an idea for a story," and I would go, "Fair enough," and nothing would really ever come of it particularly. And then Garth came in and said, "I've got an idea for a story because there's this magazine called Crisis, 2008 Year Publishing, sister magazine, and I've got an idea for a story for it. Do you want to team up?" And I was like, "Sure." And I didn't believe anything would happen with it, but Garth obviously proved that wrong. So that's what the connection was. Was the me running the shop. I don't know if I hadn't run the shop, if I would have met Garth and whether or not Troubled Souls would have happened. It's interesting. It probably would have, maybe with some, who knows? Who the hell knows? But it did, and that was that. Yeah, but it was through the shop, yes.
Now, what is it that makes you two work together so well? I mean, you seem to have a similar sense of humor.
I guess that's it. Pretty much. Specifically, we like the same sort of stuff. I mean, Garth's much more of a war nut than I am, you may have noticed. And and I'm not really particularly fussed. I enjoy a good war movie. I mean, I'm as big a Kelly's Heroes fan or Battle of the Bulge or Where Eagles Dare fan as Garth. But he tends to deep dive into war a lot more than I do. And honestly, I've drawn enough war stories to know that I don't want to draw any more, because getting all that tech correct, and especially when you're dealing with Garth, who is so knowledgeable that if you get one tiny thing wrong, he'll be like all over it. Like, "Oh, that bolt shouldn't be there on a Messerschmitt."
Specific, huh?
Like, oh, he's fucking specific. He knows his shit from his Shinola, that's for sure, when it comes to the war stuff. And that can be a bit wearing. So I'm done with war if I can get away with it. Obviously, if I'm down in my luck and and living in the gutter, and Garth comes along and says, "I've got a war story for you to draw, John," then maybe I'll take it. But at the moment, I'd rather be drawing whatever I'm drawing at the moment.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite project that the two of you have worked on together?
Probably Hitman, I think. Yeah, pretty much. The Boys was fun, but obviously that's not mine. That's Garth and Derek's. And I was just a work for hire guy. And the Hulk story and the Spider-Man stories we did together were good, fun stuff. But Garth doesn't really write Spider-Man as Spider-Man. He tends to turn Spider-Man into his version, and gets what he wants out of it, and that's fine and dandy. But it's not really my Spidey, and I don't think it's real. I don't see it as like real Spider-Man. So that kind of isn't. So I would say Hitman, just because it was the most satisfying of all the books to work on with him. It was our character. We created it. All those incidental characters are ours. And for the most part, it was me drawing it all the way through. So yeah, I've got the biggest attachment to that.
Now, going on to some of your most recent work, your book Dead Eyes from Image Comics is one that you did with Jerry Duggan.
Yep.
I know the book has some legal issues with the title, but otherwise, how was it to get back into that world?
Well, it was great fun. Jerry's a great writer. And Dead Eyes is, again, it's our character, and it's always nicest when you're working on something that you've built yourself. And the character of Dead Eyes and his relationship, the Martin Dobbs, his alter ego, his relationship with his wife is a really lovely, touching sort of relationship. And early on, it was a different sort of story, and I pushed Jerry to make it so that they were very much in love, and their relationship was rock solid, because often you don't see that in comics, because a lot of the time relationships are about the breakup of relationships, because it's much more dynamic as a story device, and so you don't get to see that. But the genius of Jerry's writing is that he makes you care so much about how strong their relationship is and how good they are together so quickly. He makes it work so well. And so I was very happy that that our character had that. I mean, he's got plenty of other shit going bad for him, so don't worry about it. There's plenty of crap coming down the pipeline for poor old Martin. But yes, of course, it's kind of been counterpointed by what you said about legal issues that I cannot talk about. And so that's why there's been severe delays with it at the moment. We've kind of been gut punched twice by first the legal stuff, followed straight after by COVID. And that's, I mean, obviously everybody's dealing with that, but coming so shortly after the legal crap, it's been a bit of a ball ache, to put it mildly. And we're not 100% sure when Dead Eyes will be reappearing, because we have a whole lot of shit to sort out and kind of get right. So yeah, I can't really say anymore. But yeah, it's a great comic, and if anybody wants to go out and pick it up, I'd be very grateful. It's a terrific book, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Last year you also worked on Yondu with our very own co-producer on this show, Lonnie Nadler. Now that was the first arc you've done on a
terrible book. Couldn't stand the writing, hacked it out, got the job done. Fuck it.
Wow.
Yondu was an absolute blast to work on. Sorry.
No, that's all right. If my research is correct, this is also the first arc you've done on a superhero book in quite some time. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm honestly a B-list kind of artist. I know. Oh no, honestly, I know my pecking order, and I know the pecking order and the way the industry works. If somebody's looking for a Spider-Man artist, they're not going to pick me. However, people look at my stuff and go, he'd be great for the sleazy underbelly of the Marvel universe. He draws gritty, sort of ugly guys real well. So, I can see where Lonnie and Lonnie got me from, and Zach and Lonnie sort of decided, along with the editors, to pick me for the job, and I was very grateful they did. It was really terrific fun. I got to draw some brilliant stuff, some nice cosmic Marvel stuff. Silver Surfer, awesome, and I had a blast with it. I mean, that's my forte, is drawing.
Well, I have to say,
see the underbelly.
Yeah. Stuff. Well, I have to say, your work on that book is actually quite stunning. I think it's a perfect fit.
Oh, thank you very much. I bust my hump on it. I look back in my career, and there's certain bits of it where I realized that I was coasting, perhaps is the right word. And there was a while ago, I decided that I should not do that anymore. Coasting is wrong. And so everything I've tried to approach with the idea of doing the best job I possibly can. It's a complete ball ache, quite frankly, as well. And everything takes twice as long, but at the same time, it's worth it for the end result, I think. But that was great fun. Lonnie and Zach were a joy to work with. and they put up with my bullshit. So yeah.
Now your work on Dead Eyes and Yondu seems quite different. Now there's a lot more playing with contrast and shadows in Dead Eyes. Do you sit down and think about how you're going to approach a book, or
definitely
at this point it just kind of flows out?
Well, maybe there's a bit of both in that, but definitely I always look at the story and try to tailor the style of my art. I mean, I think underneath the intrinsic drawing is pretty much the same, but it's the finish over the top that I'm tinkering with to come up with the sort of right look for the book. So yeah, it's definitely that. And Dead Eyes is a much more noirish sort of thriller type of thing, and I was trying to capture that aspect with it. Whereas Yondu is a little bit more gritty and seedy, and I was going for that scribbly sort of thing that I've been doing a lot more of recently. I don't hold my pen like that, by the way, normally when I'm drawing. I'm not like, it's just a random example. So yeah, I do think about it, and some of it may be instinctual, perhaps it just sort of comes out that way, and other times it's maybe more of a sort of a decision I've made fairly specifically. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of gritty underbelly characters, whether it's Yondu, Mars Attacks, Etrigan, you seem to be attracted to these lesser known ragtag sort of characters who may not get the
artist, dude. So I get to see these characters.
Well, I mean, they don't really get the attention that they deserve sometimes. And what I wanted to ask you though is that what specifically though about those B-list characters is it that attracts you?
Well, I mean, I'd love to be able to say that I was picking and choosing, but quite frankly, I'm taking what I'm getting. It's when the DC editor comes along and says, "We've got this job for you," I'm like, yeah, okay, roll over. It's I mean, obviously I'm trying to change that at the moment with I'm doing much more creator-owned stuff and doing my own thing. But honestly, my career has more been about what I've been offered as opposed to what I'm choosing. Though that said, I am more attracted to the B and C list characters. I mean, if you said to me what Marvel comic I would most like to draw, it would probably be something like the Legion of Monsters or the Torpedo or 3D Man or something like that. All the sort of characters that nobody, well, actually, I'm sure there are quite a lot of people who give a fuck about them. But I enjoy those sort of C-list characters more. I mean, obviously, if somebody said you're going to draw a Spider-Man, I'd be like, and take the job. But there is a fascination with, and I guess perhaps it's because it doesn't come with such a huge amount of baggage, because there's been so few people to stamp on those things. When you're drawing Spider-Man, how likely is it going to be that your run on Spider-Man is going to be remembered as one of the great runs on Spider-Man when you're up against Romita Jr., Romita Sr., Steve Ditko, Ross Andru, et al.? I mean, it's not fucking likely, quite frankly. So, but if you draw a really good Man Thing and Morbius, well, you could be in with a chance, possibly. Sure. I mean, Gil Kane's drawn Morbius, so I'm probably fucked there, but whatever. It's but yeah. I mean, if I'm drawing Tales of the Zombie with Garth, whatever his name was, from I'm up against Pablo Marcos, maybe, I suppose. Right. That'd be about it. Pablo's an awesome artist, but he's not maybe the guy who's so in now. So I might have a fighting chance there.
Right. Well, I mean, it also seems that a lot of these B-list characters kind of end up in the best books because their creators have more freedom with them.
Well, that's also the big thing, isn't it? Yeah, you don't have the bat office breathing down your neck, so you can do whatever the hell you like. So yeah, that is a big thing, isn't it? Nobody's really gonna care if you're gonna radically revamp the Creature Commandos or radically revamp, whomever. It's the 3D man. They're just gonna go, yeah, whatever. Maybe this will work.
Right. Yeah.
and throw a bit of cash at you and let you get on with it. It's so that's that aspect of it is you're exactly right. You do have that creative freedom perhaps to cut loose and do something a little bit radical.
Well, one thing about your art is that you do a lot of expressive faces, and there's some really strong acting in a lot of
Thank you.
your books, and that's often lacking in superhero comics. Where did this come from? Was it purely as a way to stand apart?
I know it was not intentional. I think possibly there's a certain amount because I grew up reading a lot of humor comics as well, and there's a lot of humor stuff running through my work, and also really liking Mad Magazine and Mort Drucker and guys like that, who not having any ability to do likenesses whatsoever. That when you take those humor comics and those exaggerated facial expressions that they did, and then you sort of distill that into a more realistic style, I guess, perhaps those facial expressions are maybe work. Maybe that's part of why I have that. I mean, I do use a bit of photo reference as well, so I get people to act out. I mean, Tommy Monaghan is based on me. So, you know, when I needed Tommy making a face, I would, I'd be taking a photograph of me and working from that. And I still use people to act out my stuff. And I don't see any problem with that. And if it helps and it speeds things up, all fair play.
Another big part of your style that I love is this sort of rough cross-hatching. Now, lots of artists who cross-hatch are quite clean and less expressionistic. And looking at some of your earlier work, it seems like it was less loose to begin with. Now,
sure.
Did this come about as a matter of saving time on deadlines, or was it derived from somewhere, or did it just kind of happen naturally?
It happened naturally, but it also happened because I grew in confidence with my inking. When you're less confident, you tend to be more anal and sort of focused on being perfect. I mean, that's every artist's sort of arc, isn't it? They start off wanting to be perfect, and then they get to that point where they're, as close as they're going to get to perfect, and then they go, well, what can I do now? And so, and also, I'm better at just scribbling and making it look right. Back in the old days, if I'd sort of scribbled like that, it would just look like a dog's dinner. But now I can do it, and it looks like maybe like a decent dinner, maybe a 3-course meal instead.
Right.
To try and push the analogy, which really I shouldn't be at all. So yeah, it's. I think it's a matter of caring less about being perfect and also being more confident in the ability to put down a line and sort of go, well, this is going to work, and that loosens you up and you get more expressive, hopefully. Yeah, I do find that. I mean, that said, the Dead Eyes work I was doing was so fucking tight, so like every line just like, and just to get that thick, thin line work that I was doing is very, very labor intensive. And that's partly why I'd sort of gone, right, time to move on to something else to a degree, because this is killing me as much as I wanted it to be lovely and everything. So yeah, again, it's partly to do with the sort of story you're wanting to tell, like with Yondu, obviously slick, tightly finished inks. Well, if somebody who was a slick inker had come along, or a slick artist had come along and drawn that, it would have been fine, but it just would have been different.
Sure.
And whether or not that's better or worse is debatable, depending upon your particular point of view on art. I mean, it's all subjective. There's guys who hate Eric Canetti's artwork, but they're insane because Eric Canetti's a genius. And there's guys who love, somebody who I'm not going to mention, who's terrible, because they're idiots because he's crap. So
Right.
It's just one of those things. It's all entirely subjective.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one of the signatures of your storytelling is lots of little signs and humorous Easter eggs kind of hidden in the background. Where did that develop from?
I don't know. I have no idea. Bored, I guess some of it might have been like things that Garth might have asked me to do to a degree, perhaps.
Right.
But I suppose that sort of stuff keeps you entertained in those long, lonely days over the drawing board. Hoping that maybe somebody will notice it and talk to you. Oh, maybe a fan will come up to me and ask me about that. Human
Yeah.
contact. Whoa, that's a heady brew right there. Getting to talk to a human.
Now you have a Kickstarter for The Mighty World of McCrea, which you describe as a collection of creator-owned work from John McCrea, spanning 32 years.
Yeah.
What's the rundown on this? What's the rundown on this massive project?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's again, it's sort of born out of necessitude, I suppose, because of COVID and pre-mentioned things. Not that much work about. I've been taking on a lot of commissions, and I decided that maybe I needed to do something radical for me, at any rate, because as anybody who knows me personally will attest, I'm a moron when it comes to all things computer. The fact that I'm talking to you on this is because I've got small children who know how to set this all up for me. So
you're not the only one.
Sure. Yeah, we've all got like sort of 4 foot tall people in the background, sort of going, plug that in there, Dad. So you program the bloody video like this, Dad. You idiot. I mean, where were you born? What century were you born in, Dad? Anyway, so it was sort of born of that. But I decided that one of the things I really liked when I was a kid, and I'm sort of going into my pre-packaged speech here, was when I was a kid, in the UK, they had annuals that came out at Christmas every year, and they were hardbacked, oversized books that reprinted some comics. You had your Marvel ones, a couple of DC ones, you had the humor ones, and they also did things like the $6 Million Man annual or what have you, depending on what was popular on TV at the time. And I would get these annuals at Christmas, and they had the comic stories, but they also had articles and features and puzzle pages and all this sort of business. And I thought it would be really good fun to do a sort of retrospective of my work, my creator-owned work, because that's the stuff I can reprint, but put some new stuff in and put in articles and features and things like that as well. So, for instance, with this Kickstarter, the first volume, we're reprinting The Atheist, which Phil Hester and I did many moons ago for Image. And also some shorter stories. I did a story called Dinosaurs Rule with Nick Abadzis, who created Hugo Tate. A 10-page crazy sort of romp through the land that time forgot. And a couple of other short stories. Garth and my really actual first story together, which appeared in Deadline magazine, which was
cool.
The Toss Pot 4. It's a 4-page thing, and it's our very first work together, and boy does it show. But it's still, but it's still fine. But then Jerry's going to do a new Dead Eyes prose story, which I'm going to illustrate in the style of those old pulp magazines with the stories with the artwork sort of wrapping around the text. So we're doing a Dead Eyes story like that. There's going to be puzzle pages, like a mythic board game.
Cool.
You're going to get a Dead Eyes cut out face mask that you can cut out and then attach elastic bands to, and then go out and rob banks if you want to. And that's not approved by me, true believers. Stuff like that, just fun stuff in sandwich. There's an article on the comic shop that I started that we were talking about earlier. There's a big article about that because it was tied in. The comic shop was tied in with Belfast punk scene at the time, which I was a small part of. So just interesting stuff that I think people will find interesting and fun. plus the comics and things, all wrapped up in a nice hardback. But when I first started thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe I can do one volume of this. And then I quickly discovered I've got so much creator-owned stuff. I'm doing 4 volumes, and each one comes out for Christmas each year, depending on whether or not my Kickstarter is successful. Please do buy my Kickstarter.
I'm sure it will be.
So that I do get all 4 of them right there.
Yeah, so, I mean, as we were talking about, 32 years is a lot of drawing. Did you ever like take a step back and think, holy shit, I've done a lot? I've used a lot of paper and ink.
I did. I mean, that's the thing. I thought, well, I'll get 1 volume of 200 pages, and then quickly realized I had enough to fill 4 volumes. It's of 200 pages. That's 800 pages of creator-owned work. I mean, obviously minus the articles and puzzle pages and things, but that's a lot of stuff. So yeah, I mean, and that was in between drawing all the work for hire stuff I did over the time. Mythic's not being published in it because that's too recent, I think. So that's not in there, and that's hundreds of pages of work as well. So yeah, there's a lot of creator-owned stuff I've done, as well as all that work for hire stuff too. It is. I used to be pretty quick. I used to pencil 2.5 pages a day. So that's pretty fast, really. I mean, I'm an old, tired, creaky old man now, so I can't produce anything like that nowadays. The very thought of drawing 2.5 pages in one single day just boggles my mind. But there you go. I think part of it is because I tend to try to draw better, and so I spend a bit longer. But at the same time, I look at some of my older stuff and I go, I wish I could get that energy back. Wish I could get that sort of doesn't give a fuck, balls out, energy back to my work. But I guess that's the trade-off, isn't it? When you start out, maybe you're young and you're full of cum and you don't give a fuck. And then as you get older and you mature and you settle down and you put your slippers on and your pipe goes in your mouth and you kind of just sort of become more sedate and your work takes on a different sort of thing. And, so I guess that's just that.
Now, John, our time has come to an end, and it's time to reveal what you've been drawing this whole time.
Here we go. That's Dredd as he stands, slightly unfinished, but looking fascistic and glorious, I think.
Yeah, we will definitely show the final piece at the end of this video. Thank you so much. If you want to own this awesome piece of art, check out the auction link down below and make sure to bid. All the proceeds from this sale will go towards the Hero Initiative. John, I want to thank you so much for being cornered with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been a pleasure too. Thanks very much for having me on. I've had a blast, and you look after yourselves, guys, and everybody out there. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you for watching Drawn and Cornered. Remember to bid, make sure to subscribe, click the little bell icon for future episodes. But for now, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.